hour. Let's welcome in our next guest, Financial Phil McCoy from Ameriprise Financial and the Mirius Group of Financial Advisors. Good morning, Philly.
Good morning, Rob. How are you guys?
We are well, and yourself, Phil?
I am living the dream, but I feel a bit inadequate. We have all these important people on between Barrett and Hornby and Bob Kukin with these terrible storms, and here comes Financial Phil to talk about daily money movement. So I feel inadequate today. I wish I was surrounded by more boring guests is what I wish.
You shouldn't. We've got war in Iraq, oil situations, stock prices, international crises and tensions. I'd say that you're right in the middle and the thick of it.
Yeah, don't let him off the hook. Don't let him off the hook too much.
I downplay that stuff.
Yeah.
I downplay that stuff, so I don't make it exciting.
Yeah, I don't know, Phil. I think you have every reason to feel inadequate.
Thank you, sir.
Stop.
Well, that's another way of looking at it.
Not at all, Phil.
Yeah. Phil, I know your wife is in education, and potentially a daughter or two may go into it as well. It's a money issue. Let's talk about the lack of market pay or locality pay out of the legislative session again this year. Any thoughts on that?
It's disappointing, and I know because I've been bugging you about it since they've been down there, but I know that our local delegates and our elected officials, they damn near killed themselves trying to get that passed. And I've been tied into that, before, my wife is nearing the end. She's 47, but she's in it now for 28 years or so. So it's more for my youngest daughter, who has a strong desire to stay in her community. She feels a need to stay in her community and kind of go back to where she came from. I think that's how she feels anyway. And it's disappointing because I think she's going to be great at what she does. And I'm going to encourage her, if this never happens, to go somewhere else. And that makes me feel guilty. But at the same time, people have to make a living. And watching around the state, watching Metro News and WSAZ in Charleston, and it's clear the disdain that some of those elected officials down there have for the Eastern Panhandle. It's obvious in some extent, especially the one from Wood County, and it's disappointing because I don't know what the heck we've done to them other than kind of support them here of late. And I'm from down there, so it kind of I have mixed feelings. I know they're good people, but just because our economy is better here is no reason to have issues with us. But they do. You see it in sports. We go down there for state tournaments, and I kid you not, every team that's there will sit on one side and root against the Eastern Panhandle team. It's happened for years, for the most part. And it's kind of disappointing because I thought this made common sense. A dollar goes much further down there than it does up here. And, for our teachers and our educators, that I'm a big fan of all of them, to make $30,000 less than what the average person does, I think it's a shame.
Well stated, sir.
And I think, you know what, Phil, I had a conversation with some folks Saturday night, and kind of that mindset, you sort of wonder, did it come from many, many years, many, many generations of, say, the coal fields of West Virginia sort of supporting the Eastern Panhandle before we exploded with coal severance, all of that, and now all of a sudden when the tide turns, they're just not feeling the same way. So I don't know if that's part of it.
Well, you bring that up, and I read a quote from Mike Woelfel, and ultimately the Senate passed this, so this is not a shot at the entire Senate, but it may be a representation of how some feel. And that was Mike Woelfel who, when looking at the market pay bill that Senator Barrett was championing there in the Senate, began to go back in time and say, what about all the time that we sent money from the coal fields up to the Eastern Panhandle? And then he said something that I regarded as being a very insulting, pedantic, condescending statement.
Yeah,
and that he said, when they were selling apples on the side of the road. And I thought, my goodness, that's the thought right there. We sent you coal money. Well, all you had was an apple to sell on the side of the road up there in the Panhandle, where all you guys did was sell apples.
Yeah.
And we supported you. And now that you're doing well, you want to take money from us. Well, no one's taking money from
That's
you.
not taking money. And that's kind of, and this may be a step too far, but that mindset, it seems to me from the most conservative state, one of the more conservative states in the country, this mindset that this person can't get a penny more than me, even though cost of living up here is much more, seems to be a bit socialist to me. That's how it's always stricken me. It seems to be a socialist or a poverty mentality, and we're not getting anything more than what the educators say in my county, Mingo County. I love the county. I love the people there. But we're not getting anything more. Their dollar still, even with the market pay, their dollar would still go further than what our educators' dollars up here go. They are well off if you are teaching in Mingo County compared to where our teachers are up here. And I know a lot of them because of my wife and her family and my daughter. And I know that single teachers or married teachers, they can't afford to. It's very difficult. They have to have second jobs, third jobs, side hustles, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But with the education that it takes, and it's not easy. It does. It just seems to be a bit socialist to me, and it's extremely disappointing. When the one senator, or was it a House member, Senator Mike Woelfel, that said that, sounded to me like he was asking for reparations almost. I don't know, but it seems like a socialist mentality. That's how it lands on me, and it's disappointing.
Bill, you were about to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's a little bit of human nature. You call it socialist, Phil, but I think it extends to all of us. If I can't have it, you shouldn't get it either. So
that's disappointing.
And we've heard legislators say on this program that, not our local contingent, but others say, the teacher in Mingo County is doing the same thing as the teacher in Berkeley County. So why should we, but to your point about socialism, what have you, it's just not the same. It's apples and oranges.
It's not.
Yeah.
It is. It is not the same at all. And, and be clear, I still got the Southern drawl, and you can, as my wife says, you can take the man out of mate one, but you can't take the mate one out of the man. That's true, and my roots are from down there, but that mentality that the southern part of the state where I still have my brother lives, that mentality is disappointing.
Yeah, it depends on whose glasses you're looking through. And your glasses in the Eastern Panhandle are not the same glasses in the southern part of the state. So it comes back to the fact, if I cannot have it, you should not get it either.
Stacy Burkett's post, the legislature voted to give themselves a pay raise. They make more than some service personnel. Yeah. I think the legislators make $21,000 a year, maybe 22. Then they did not vote this year to give themselves a pay raise. It was a session or two ago. But again, that's you're going to ask me to move to Charleston for 2 months and to deal with constituent services year round, and you're going to give me $22,000 a year? Seriously?
I wouldn't do that for $22 million.
I mean, that's the last thing that I'm going to complain about is what delegates and senators make, because they all make next to nothing. There's just no money in doing that. $22,000 a year. In Congress, they make what, $176.5 or $180 around. You want to complain about that? Go ahead.
That's the House side. The Senate makes a lot more.
Yeah. So, but at the delegate level in West Virginia, that's something that, I mean, goodness, that's nothing. That's pennies. Now, Phil, let's speaking of pennies, I need to look for some in my change cup every time I go to the gas station now. With oil being what it is and such, and we talk about that $100 barrel number as being kind of the psychological number where we start to have problems with gas prices. So I heard a report this morning that gas prices are up something like 85 cents over the last 3 weeks or whatever since this began. And I've noticed it because I buy a lot of gasoline. If you don't drive a lot, maybe you don't notice it, maybe you do. There was a report of a gas station in California where it was over $7 a gallon. California's always kind of way up there because of all the taxes they put on gasoline. But either way, it is getting noticed, Phil. And again, at what point does it become a problem?
It becomes a problem over the length of this, of course, is the main issue because of where we are with inflation, because of what we happened, everything. I know I bring everything back to the Federal Reserve, but it's kind of true at this moment. And what impact, long-term impact it may have on inflation. If this is short-term, it's not going to be a big deal. Now, when we look at, and let's really look at the year as a whole and what our markets were doing leading up to the war and increased gas prices, we weren't in a stellar place to begin with. It was kind of flat, but very volatile, and we were giving a lot back on the growth side of things. So NASDAQ and the larger companies that had done so well over the last few years had been given some back, and they've shared in this fall as well, which doesn't make any sense, but it's continued on through March at this point. So now we're down on the S&P. I didn't look at the other two, but on the S&P we're down about 3.6% year to date, which isn't drastic, but it does feel drastic because of how volatile it's been. It seems as if every day there's huge swings throughout the day, and we've been there, done that before. But right now we've got a lot of fear. We have the artificial intelligence fear that we talked about last week, and now we again with the fear with the inflation. I thought it was and I had the same thought that I think Mr. Market thought when I read that we were releasing oil reserves last week, and so that I read the headline after a meeting, and I thought that's probably not good because we're thinking that this war is going to be short-lived and the Straits of Hormuz will be open soon. And all the pain from the supply stoppage of oil would be short-lived. Then why are we releasing our oil reserves? And suddenly, when that news came out, oil prices actually went up, and our markets went down pretty drastically. So on the surface, you may think like, oh, that should help the markets. It didn't at all. Actually, I think it had a negative impact on the market. So we're trying to find out any information that we can about how long this may last. One thing that's going to happen this week is the opinion of the Federal Reserve. We may get some idea on what they think. There's going to be no movement on rates. I think that's very obvious. There's going to be no movement on rates, but their opinion of this and how strong is their opinion of this and what this may mean for inflation moving forward. So along with all the other headlines we have, headwinds that we have, just throw another one on there. But what we've seen over the last few years is that seemingly no matter how strong the headwinds, our markets find a way, and the leader of that is artificial intelligence, and the bell cow for that has been NVIDIA, which they have a conference this week. So throughout that conference, what new innovation will that spark that growth portion of the indices to take off yet again, or will it be a non-event? But all of these things we need to find out. But there's a lot of headwinds, a lot of information still to consume. Overnight markets look pretty good. I've not taken that to the bank because that typically switches by lunch. We can start red and end up green, or start green and end up red. It means little to nothing of late what the overnight markets have said.
Oil's down about 3% a barrel. Hold on a second. Bill at 95.87. Brent crude is down about 0.5% a barrel at 102.64. And as far as the markets go, as Phil was mentioning, they're up this morning. The NASDAQ more than 1%. The S&P almost 1%. Dow futures up 0.75%.
Yeah, when it's going to end, nobody knows. Everybody's that's the one thing they acknowledge. Nobody knows. But Phil, the price of oil is approaching $100 a barrel. I have heard it mentioned more and more frequently, speculation that it could be much higher. It could be as much as $200 dollars a barrel. If it should get to $200 a barrel, what would that do to our economy? Could our economy support that?
No, we would have to, but what we would see is runaway inflation again. And I think that's what everyone's fear is that we're going to get back to those levels of 2022 when inflation was upwards of 8, pushing 9%. I forget the peak of it. It may have gotten to 9.1, but that fear of, which wasn't that long ago, of 2022 is coming right back, and we don't have necessarily the ammunition that we even had then to combat that. We still have ammunition. We can still raise rates to slow it and do all these things, but we were at a much lower starting point with rates than what we are right now. So it's not as if there is a good time to have something like this happen, but it's not a good time for the economy for something like this to happen. So that's why we want it to be short-lived, and our economy will handle it. We've handled much more difficult things. It's just the longevity. How long will we have to handle it, and how high will that inflation go, and how high will rates go to combat that? What will it do to the labor market? There's all of these questions that are swirling for, like, as you had just referenced, seemingly we have no idea when this may end. We thought it was going to be really quick. Hopefully it still is. It could be. But, there's other pundits that think it could take quite some time.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, Phil, because we had a conversation just last week that, this is just such a short-lived war. And now it's kind of like, is it really?
The other thing,
yeah, and it doesn't appear to be.
Yeah.
No.
The other thing, Phil, is our GDP, which has been adjusted downward for the fourth quarter. It had been 1.4. Now it's been adjusted downward to 1/2 of that, 0.7%. So that shows that the economy was not in strong shape anyway.
Yeah, and it's starting to slow, and that falls on the side of supporting interest rate cuts. But how can you do that if we're facing all these headwinds with inflation? We've kind of put tariffs on the back burner for the moment. We'll talk about it again, I'm sure, as soon as this is resolved or we have some comforting news. We'll start to focus again on tariffs. But we got all these headwinds, and like you just said, our economy is slowing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That was part of the reason we increased rates, was to slow the economy and taper down this inflation. It's cyclical. When you look at it and remove the headlines, it is cyclical. That is kind of supposed to happen. But for this to happen with the price of oil right in the face of that, that's a difficult problem. And a lot of people do find comfort in this. It does seem to be, and I hate to get political, but then I say that and then I do it anyway. But it seems to be one of the strongholds on our administration. Is one of their babies is the stock market. And the thought is that we won't let it go too far, even if we just have to say we won and pull out or whatever it is, that we will say or do whatever we need to do to keep that stock market at a happy place, because it's always a bragging point. And right now, at least for 2026, last year was fine. It was volatile, but it was fine. We had a good year last year. This year hasn't been drastic. It's not. It really hasn't been. It doesn't feel that way, but it hasn't been that bad. But we're not going to let it go too far, or whatever we need to do to repair that, we will. If that's our main focus, and from the standpoint of the stock market only, that's where we can find some comfort as it pertains to our 401ks and such.
And then the real question is, what can we do?
Burbage, I think we said that last week, is, what exactly can we do to lift the stock market? And it might have been the same day, Bill, where we had discussed that. So it might have been last Monday, I don't recall. But shortly after, there was a press conference where we announced that we're further ahead in the war than what we thought we were going to be when it started, and it's almost over. And then our stock market took off, even if only for a day. But those days are really important. So when we're struggling, when we throw a few punches back to the green side, it is really important that you're there for it. And we saw that on a day last week. And, it could be much worse if we don't have those days. And I was left with the feeling that was the purpose of that press conference. I don't know that this is true, but I was left with the feeling that the purpose of that press conference was to give our markets a boost.
So I have a question for you, Phil, on interest rates, because I found this to be a particularly interesting move that my bank made in the last week. So a week ago, they came out with a 4% CD rate, which they hadn't been offering for at least a year, maybe longer, actually. And at the same time, a week later, then cut their savings account rate by 0.1%. Explain that one.
Short. Their estimations anyway. Their short-term rates are likely to stay stagnant, while they expect the long-term rates, whatever that 4% that term was. They think those rates are either going to go up a little bit or at least not go down. So they're estimating, that bank is estimating that the rate for that CD, say it was a year, that we see that rates are going to stay this way for a year, if not even go up. So if they go up, that would be really good for the bank, because now they've got you locked in at the 4% for a year. And if rates increase, which isn't really it isn't widely expected to still happen because of the new Federal Reserve chief in May and June. But that is what they're betting on. And if you put your money in that CD and rates go up 75 basis points, then you are getting much less than what they're making on that money.
But with a new Fed chair coming in, Trump selected, with orders to cut rates, it makes no sense to me that they would offer a higher market rate CD than what the current market actually bears.
Me either. If I were offering guaranteed rates, it most certainly wouldn't be higher. But we do have to remember, especially me, because I think I put too much personally. I put too much on Jerome Powell or Kevin Warsh or whoever it's going to be. They're not the only voice in that room. It's a very loud voice, but they're not the only voice in that room. So others do have a say. They do have a vote, and they do have persuasion as well. So just because it's someone that the president has appointed and we know that they want rates to go down doesn't mean that will actually occur because there's other voices in that room.
So what does it all mean, Phil, in terms of home sales? We're talking about interest rates and how the fluctuations. I read an article this weekend that was like, oh, well, it's coming back a little bit, and you need to be patient, blah blah blah. But what's your thought on that?
I would think for home sales, I think it's probably still going to be a headwind for home sales, but it typically, when rates go down, home sales pick up. But also typically, because the math doesn't math in this circumstance, but when rates come down, your demand for homes go up, and therefore the price of homes all over, not just here in Berkeley County, but all over, also increase. So you kind of end up in the same place in the road as far as a home buyer. If you have a mortgage, that is, you end up in the same place in the road. So home sales are kind of bouncing all over, and we'll look to someone like Caterpillar or some of those old companies to see what their future orders are to try to determine what new home it normally starts with new home builds, what those look like and how prosperous those are. But right now it's kind of swirling around because no one knows what to expect with rates and that's how like gas, oil flows into everything. How does it flow into home sales? Well, because it impacts interest rates, which impacts home sales. And right now, there's really no solid prediction on what will occur with home sales.
Caterpillar stock up $10.82 this morning, Phil. I think you hit that one on the head.
There we go.
Why Caterpillar?
Oh,
for home sales.
That's a bellwether right there.
But for home sales,
yeah, equipment and such.
Okay,
so equipment purchases and such.
Interesting.
Yeah, the country goes as Caterpillar goes. That's what they always tell you.
Yeah, I know. I've heard that, but I cannot tie it into home sales. That was my question.
You need backhoes. You need all kind of heavy equipment to build a house. You got to move dirt, bust up rocks, build foundations.
You need new ones. You're breaking old ones. They need parts and service and all those fun things.
I yield, gentlemen. I yield.
Got to get Justin Henry in here.
Yeah, I watched in my neighborhood. I was one of the newer houses 26 years ago, and watched them build the house across from me. They bring in all kind of stuff. I was particularly fascinated watching them hang the trusses for the roof, and watching that dude balance himself 30 feet above the ground, catching the truss from the hook and putting it in place. That guy's got nerves of steel, let me tell you like that. Phil, I got 10 seconds. How do we find you for more information today?
You can reach us at 304-263-4343 or stop by and see us with an appointment at 1270 Winchester Avenue or right here in Burnsburg.
Thank you, Phil. Have a great day.
And Phil, you are appreciated.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.